Lynne Hybels is our speaker tonight. Together with her husband, Pastor Bill Hybels, they established and started the Willowcreek Church community in Illinois in 1975 with an interest in addressing the needs of the whole people and the whole world. I was honored also to receive her book as a gift, Nice Girls Don't Change the World. And that was really inspirational. Lynne Hybels wrote this book, and for years, she has been involved with Willow's Ministry Partnership in under-resourced communities in Latin America and Africa. She is also a co-author of Rediscovering Church and Fit to Tide. She has recently collaborated with the Willowcreek Association to produce Hope and Action, a DVD and participant guide that helps churches and small groups address the AIDS pandemic. Tonight, Lynne Hybels will be inspiring us, actually, on Daughters of Abraham, What I'm Learning from Women Making Peace in the Holy Land. I would also love to take this place and opportunity to invite you all for a tea time tomorrow with Lynne Hybels, a very special event for women only, excuse me, gentlemen. But tomorrow is International Women's Day, and we will be celebrating this by having tea time with Lynne Hybels in our new center in Bethlehem. So women are invited, and again, sorry, gentlemen. Please, Lynne.
I didn't know that she was going to introduce me tonight. That was very meaningful. I love that young woman. It's been a pleasure to get to know her on my visits here, and so that was very meaningful. Thank you. I am really discombobulated tonight. Does this sound right? Everything okay? Okay. You know, sometimes a talk just sort of falls together. I mean, I've heard that happens. I've never really had it happen. But then there are other times when you can't force it together. I mean, no matter what you do. And this talk, I have put it together in so many different ways, added things, thrown things out. I don't even remember where it ended up this afternoon. I don't know what I have here in front of me. So I'm feeling a little insecure to begin with. Then on the way over here, I ran into Tony Campolo, the master of encouragement, and said, "You better be good." Said, "We're expecting a blessing tonight." I'm like, "Oh, please don't say that, Tony." And then I saw Bob Roberts, you know, famous, wonderful pastor from Texas, and he said, "Okay, Lynne, go preach it tonight." Like, I don't preach, okay? I want to make that clear right off the bat. I don't preach, and I'm not preaching tonight. I don't even teach Bible studies, okay? That's not who I am. There's lots of great preachers here this week, and you've heard them and you've heard more, but I'm not one of them. I am a storyteller, and so I will tell some of my stories tonight. But I really am glad to be here. It's been a pleasure to be here after being here 2 years ago at the First Christ at the Checkpoint Conference and seeing, you know, a big change, a great growth in numbers and also just in depth and relationship. And so it's great to be here. I've actually been here in Bethlehem 6 times in the last 3 years. And actually, I don't even really like to travel. But this place has gotten inside of me in such a way that when I arrive, I feel as if I've come home. And I think that's about having to do with having fallen in love with people. And it's also about having a sense of calling from God. I have to say that 4 years ago, I thought I had a pretty good idea where my life was headed. And frankly, that did not involve the Middle East. My world was plenty big enough. But, you know, God doesn't really care that much about what I think I know. And so he had other plans and made them clear to me. And so here I am again. And I can say very honestly that while I did not anticipate this journey into the Holy Land, it continues to be one of the best global journeys of my life. And I'm so grateful that I have the freedom to be here, not just at this conference, but at this point in time and space when the need to incarnate Jesus and the need to bring God's kingdom to earth and the need for the church to truly be the church is so great. I consider it a great privilege to be part of this. But it's not easy to be involved in this place. To be very honest, nothing has ever challenged and changed me as much as my journey to and through and around this time and place. It has been a time and place of awakening first, awakening to the fact that things are not as they should be here, and lots of people are getting hurt. And a time and place of anger about injustice, when intense feelings have been stirred inside of me. And a time and place where I have received a very definite call to action, where I realized that I did not have the option of being a disinterested observer here. God had bound my heart with people in this place and had given me a platform to use on their behalf. And I earnestly believe, and I still believe, that every path in my life had been leading me right to this time and this place. And for someone who had spent decades confused about what to do with myself and bound by all kinds of fears of all shapes and sizes, it was extraordinarily moving to be so completely captured and compelled by the people of this land and by the cause of justice here. But then, one day, 1 week, 1 month, not long ago, I was broadsided, humbled, utterly flattened, because I realized that there's a huge difference between being an angry activist and being a peacemaker. I'd become the angry activist, but that wasn't Jesus' calling. And I saw with stunning clarity that I was well on my way to doing more harm than good in this place, and adding more pain to people who have already suffered too much in Israel and in Palestine. The truth is, I had not listened enough, or learned enough, or practiced loving enough to be a peacemaker. And I want to say right up front that I don't know how to be a peacemaker today. I am barely at the beginning of learning what that means. At this point, I can see 3 ways that I can move closer to that, and I'm sure there are many others, but I know that there are at least these 3. First, I need to listen to people's stories, to more and more stories, from people I feel drawn toward and people I don't, from people I think I agree with and those I'm pretty sure I don't, from people I sort of understand to those I just don't get at all. I need to look in their eyes and hear their voices and listen to their words and then listen past their words. And while I'm listening, I need to pray to God to help me really hear. Second, I need to learn more. As an outsider coming into a different culture, I'm going to make mistakes all the time. I know I will. But the more ignorant I am, the more mistakes I'm going to make and the bigger they're going to be. Engaging here has presented the biggest intellectual challenge of my life. I need to keep learning if I want to be faithful to God's call. Third, I need to be spiritually transformed. As I was preparing for this trip, it's this third thing that really weighed on me. I need to be spiritually transformed. I need to be cleaned out, emptied out, and filled with something divine, something supernatural, something that's better than the stuff that I'm made of naturally. Several weeks ago, I prayed for a scripture passage to focus on as I prepared to come here. And the passage that seemed to be given to me was 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, the chapter that I think we too often use for weddings and too seldom use for real life. But I think the message in that for me is that I'm here this week to learn to love better. I'm listening to everything through that grid. How is this that I'm hearing now calling me or challenging me or enabling me to love better? To love Palestinians better and to love Israelis better. During my early trips here, I spent most of my time in the West Bank, and that was profound and wonderful, and I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do that. But at a certain point, a wise Palestinian friend of mine said, "You're spending too much time here. You need to spend more time in Israel. You need to listen to a broader range of voices." And that was true. So I've done that. On recent trips, I've met with secular mainstream Jews. I've met with people in the Israeli peace movement. I've eaten Shabbat meals with Orthodox families. I've talked with Israeli families who have lost children to the violence of suicide bombers. And perhaps most significantly, I've walked slowly through the halls of Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial. And I will say honestly that I will never bring a group of people here again without having them walk slowly through those halls. How can we begin to connect constructively with this place and these people without holding that reality in our conscious awareness? And yet, at the same time, how can I be silent about government policies and practices that seem to me to violate the human dignity and the rights of Palestinians on a regular basis? I have seen too much to be silent. I have to speak out, and I have to speak out from the unique perspective that I have. That perspective is that I am a woman, I am a wife, I am a mother, I am a grandmother, and that shapes how I perceive the world. Fortunately, during the last few years, I've had some really wonderful women, wives, mothers, and grandmothers from this country mentoring me on this journey. Just want to take a few minutes just to tell you about some of those women, just to brag about them a little bit. And I hope my technology works here. It does. How many of you know Nora Court? Yes. She's a hero. Actually, Len Rogers in the front row there first introduced me to Nora Court, and he said, really, we call her Miss Jerusalem. Nora was from an old Palestinian family in Jerusalem, and they lost their home and their property in 1948. I think Nora was just about 2 years old then. And from that time on, she lived a very difficult life, but she was committed to God, committed to Jesus Christ, and committed to using the pain of her life as a way of empowering other women. And so she started a medical clinic in the old city for Palestinians who were living there and didn't get medical care. She realized that there were many women in the West Bank who didn't have a livelihood, and so she had a dream of using some of their skills as seamstresses and needle workers to help them earn a living. And so she started this center in the old city, and every time I come here, I take women to shop there because through this shop, they support 600 women in the West Bank who would not have a livelihood any other way. And they make beautiful work. And you can see the sparkle in this woman's eyes. She is a feisty woman, and I love meeting with her. She always inspires me. And at home, in my living room, these are some of the pillows that I purchased in Jerusalem and taken home because I think they're beautiful, but also because I want to remember what one woman with a dream for other women can do. And I want to remember the women here who are working so hard, and I don't want to forget them. Next woman I want to tell you about is Ann Clayton. Now, I didn't have time to Photoshop all the men out of that photo, but anyway, Ann is, there's Ann. Ann used to be, she and her husband were on the staff of World Vision here, and now she works for Friends of Sabile in the UK, But the first time I came here, I was on the World Vision U.S. board, and so I came here and met Ann, and she said, okay, I've got to take you off the beaten path. I want you to really see what there is to be seen. And so she took me up to Jenin. Now, not a lot of American tourists go up to Jenin, but I was not on the tourist path, and Anne took me up there. And one of the things that we got to do was meet a group of women, Muslim women in Jenin, who were learning to be beekeepers. And this was the most amazing story of women who were in a very destitute situation, and their husbands did not have jobs, their children did not have money to go to school. And so these women learned to be beekeepers. And all of the women in this group had to learn all of the very different facets of the business. And when we met with them, we said, well, how did your husbands feel about this? And they said, well, yeah, first they were really suspicious because, for one thing, we were getting out of the house and we were meeting together once a week. And they thought, what is going on with these women? So the husbands came to our meetings and they saw what we were doing. And then they finally realized, wait, they are really producing honey and selling it and making money. And so these women said, for the first time in our lives, we can help our families. And I love that photograph because I think those women look a little tough, but really happy and really empowered. I love that. Okay, Ilda, here you are. These are the girls from Holy Land Trust. You'll see Ilda there in the middle. I met them on one of my first trips here. And what really grabbed me about these young women is that they're just like my daughter and her friends. They're bright, young, intelligent, passionate, capable, wanting to change the world. And I just fell in love with them. And Ilda said the first time I was there, she said, you need to come back. Okay, I think I will. And every time she says, please come back. And now tomorrow we get a new event together, and I think that will be great fun. Hey, this is Nora Carmi. Many of you know her. You will see her a little bit later. She's going to come up here and join me. Nora works for Friends of Seville, and I met her on one of my earlier trips here, and she said to me, I have someone that I want you to meet. And so she took me to meet someone, and I'm going to talk to you about this woman later. But it was one of the early experiences I had here that just broke my heart and captured me. And Nora has become one of my heroes. Okay. Dina Catenaccio and her husband, Johanna. Now, you have not seen Dina and Johanna like this, but they were in Chicago this winter in a snowstorm, and there they are. And I had the opportunity of interviewing them at an event in our church. And you know Johanna, you've heard him. He's brilliant and he's wonderful. You might not know Dina, and I got to tell you, she's brilliant and she's wonderful too. And I told the women of my church that I was introducing her to, I said, this young woman would be a strong, powerful, dynamic leader in any church in the United States. And she is in an Arab culture in Israel, in a minority situation. And she's the director of the Arab Israeli Bible Society there. And she is a dynamic young woman who has a passion for using the scripture to impact the women and families in the Arab community in Israel. And I mean, you have to meet this woman. She's extraordinary. Okay, Jihan Nasser. Now, many of you hear about her husband, Daoud, and you should, because Daoud is absolutely phenomenal, and what they do out of Tent of Nations is amazing. But Jihan has a ministry to women in the village of Nahalin, probably not saying that right, but Daoud was telling me, he was bragging about her and what she does with the women in the village. And he said, 2 years ago, I think she was teaching in Bethlehem at the Bible College and the Lutheran College. And Daoud said, I told her that sometime she's going to be teaching the women in the village. And she said, no way. But now 2 years later, she's doing that. She has a dynamic ministry there. And I love that story because so many times in my life I say, no way. I think a lot of women say no way because we're afraid or we think God can't really be calling us to do that. And I love the fact that Jihan said no way, but then she pushed through that and she's doing something extraordinary. Okay, this is Salwa, and I know I can't even try to say her name, but she is a Palestinian Israeli who lives in Ramallah, and she's a social worker. She works with children and advocates on behalf of women and children. And I just got to know her recently, and actually yesterday she took me on an adventure that I will be telling about later too. But these women are my heroes. And each time I come here, the list of my heroes grows and grows. You know, months ago, when I decided to talk about women, I didn't realize I had forgotten that tonight would be the eve of International Women's Day, as Ilda said, March 8 tomorrow. And I didn't realize how appropriate what I was being. But the truth is that I believe that women are the greatest untapped resource in the world. Women are the greatest untapped resource in the world. And that's true whether you're talking about economic development or community transformation or peacemaking. You get women involved and they make a difference. Now, the other side of that is that, unfortunately, women are also the most oppressed people group in the world. And that is statistically and factually true. They're the most underfed, undereducated, underserved, and underprotected people group in the world. And that's a tragedy for them, and also for all the people that they would serve and benefit if they had half a chance. And so to invest in women here, whether it's in economic development with women who are just not making ends meet, or with making sure that women are around the tables where decisions are made, this is worth investing in. It's worth doing. Now, I told you earlier that Nora Carmi, one of my heroes, introduced me to a woman that really changed my relationship with this place and broke my heart, really. And she said, I want to introduce you to a woman. And the woman that she introduced me to is named Ismi, and that's Ismi and her husband. They're a Muslim couple living in East Jerusalem. And prior to October 12, 2009, Ismi and her husband lived in a small but tidy one-story house on the outskirts of Jerusalem. That was a picture of their house and their family standing in front of their house. But on that morning, October 12, while Ismi drove her 3 young children to school, policemen broke into her home and demanded that her sick husband get out of bed and come outside. Ismi returned home just in time to watch bulldozers destroy her home and everything in it. Though Ismi and her husband owned the land where their house was built, demolition had been a constant possibility because they did not have a permit to build their home, which is a common plight since it's very hard for Palestinians to get building permits. But the threat of demolition had not materialized until that unseasonably hot October day, just 2 weeks prior to our visit. We met with Ismi and her family in their new home, which is a white tent given to them by the Red Cross. Ismi's 29-year-old husband was recovering from serious heart surgery, which is why he was at home sleeping on the morning of the demolition. Their 2 little daughters had adjusted fairly well to living in the tent, and they talked freely about it at school. But their 8-year-old brother holds his fear and frustration inside. Because of the stress, he had become unable to control his bowels, which was very humiliating for him. And he was becoming increasingly hostile and violent. And like many children in similar situations, he was feeling more and more vulnerable as he saw the inability of his parents to provide a safe and stable life for him. Ismi remained stoic until my friend Christine embraced her and expressed her sorrow and promised to pray for her. Then Ismi began to wipe away the tears from her eyes. The family owns the property on which the tent sits. Why was their house demolished? Why does this have to happen? And why is this okay? Why is this okay? I've since heard that their house was rebuilt, but still with no building permit, so there's no guarantee of what will happen in the future. But as a wife and mother, I look at this picture of this family, and I cannot be silent. I have to tell these stories. I have to make people aware. The next woman that I want to tell you about is a young woman named Miriam. Miriam is from the village of Aboud, and that's a small Christian village near Ramallah, populated mostly by Christians. And a year ago in March, a group of about 30 people, friends of mine, who are traveling here, went to Aboud and spent a night in the homes of the Palestinian Christians there. And while we were there, we met the local Orthodox priest, who was really a very extraordinary and impressive leader. He led youth groups where students learned traditional dances, and they put on a show for us. He ministers to a lot of young families in the church, and so when we attended the church service there were a lot of kids, had micro businesses for women. Very, very impressive man. But the main claim to fame in Aboud is the hospitality. The hospitality. As you all know, Arab culture is known for its hospitality, and in Aboud we were graciously served. On the other hand, it was a bit of an adventure, our visit to Aboud. Some of us ended up in homes where no one spoke any English. Others of us had to sleep in cozy beds, smooshed together with our new friends, because that's all the room there was, and that seemed appropriate. Personally, I was invited to share a bed with a 20-year-old Palestinian Christian girl named Marian, who knew a little bit of English. I will confess I was a bit put off by the sleeping arrangements, but in the end it wasn't an issue because I discovered that Miriam's mother had just died a year earlier, and Miriam was lonely and just needed somebody to sit up late at night and look at the photos of her mother before she died, and of her sister's wedding that her mother did not get to attend. So rather than trying to sleep, we looked at photos and tried to talk. And that night, I had one of those experiences where suddenly the general becomes very specific. Big issues become very personal. Theoretical analyses shrink down to the daily life of one girl. For security purposes, the settlers up on the hill above Aboud didn't want Palestinians driving on any of the roads close to the settlements, so soldiers used huge boulders to close the road that used to connect Aboud with the surrounding areas. Unfortunately, that was the road that used to bring customers to buy the handicrafts and olive oil products made in the village. So the closure of the roads basically destroyed the economy of Aboud. Although Miriam graduated from secretarial school, she can't find a job in Aboud because the economy is so bad. So some of her friends and cousins, are pictured here, traveled to Ramallah for work, but even there the options are limited. Miriam's father is a contractor who works in Tel Aviv. Although he's Palestinian, he's a very skilled worker, so he does have a special permit to work in Israel. And Tel Aviv is not very far away. In fact, the sparkling buildings of Tel Aviv are clearly visible from Miriam's house. But because of the road closures and delays at the checkpoints, Miriam's dad has to leave at 3 a.m. every morning in order to be at work at 6. And he doesn't get home until 6 p.m. Miriam's older brother and sister both moved to Bethlehem, where the job situation is a little better. And though Bethlehem isn't very far from Aboud, travel restrictions make it impossible for Miriam to go there except on very special occasions. So she spends a lot of time alone. She is bright and beautiful and energetic, but she feels pretty hopeless about life. One afternoon in Aboud, we Americans walked with Miriam and other villagers into a field to plant olive trees to replace those that had been uprooted when the settlement was built nearby. While we walked down the road that had been closed to cars, another young Palestinian girl, Suzanne, told me about what it was like in October when the whole village comes together to harvest the olives. The men climb into the trees to pick the olives, and then they drop them to the ground where the girls and the women gather them up. And she said it's like a huge party, so festive, with people sleeping under the trees at night so they can get up early and work in the morning. Unfortunately, the olive fields of Aboud are shrinking. with each new parcel of land that's taken for settlement expansion or for settler-only roads. So while we planted the little olive seedlings, Israeli soldiers sat on a hilltop and watched us. The following week, after we were long gone, a group of villagers went alone to the field to replant more trees. But that time the soldiers didn't just watch. They came and uprooted the trees and told the villagers to go home. After being there, after spending 2 days talking and walking and laughing and worshiping with these Palestinian Christian families, I really can't comprehend it. And I can't be quiet about that. And one of my plans is to be here next October during the olive harvest. I'm really looking forward to that. Inshallah, I hope. The next woman that I want to tell you about, young woman named Michal Rotan. And by the way, I know I'm just going to slaughter all these names that I'm saying tonight. I know I will. But Michal is an Israeli Jew who graduated from Ben Gurion University and now serves as the program coordinator of Negev Coexistence Forum for Civil Equality in Israel. Much of her work involves peaceful advocacy for unrecognized Bedouin villages in the Negev. And I actually first met Michal, strangely, at my house in Chicago. I heard that she was passing through Chicago with a group of Bedouins from Israel, and so I invited them to stop by. The story is a little more complicated than that, but not much. That's pretty much how it happened. So Michal and several of her Bedouin friends from Israel sat around my dining room table to get acquainted with some of my friends. And the first thing Michal said to me was this: I didn't think evangelical Christians cared about Bedouins. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, well, there are tens of thousands of Arab Bedouins living in the Negev who are Israeli citizens, but they live in villages that are unrecognized by the state of Israel, which means that those villages are not part of the social or economic infrastructure of the country. And so they get no services like healthcare or a good education system or water. And so the Bedouins live in very desperate poverty. And what's more, many of them are being forcibly moved off of their land and moved into urban areas, which totally disrupts their traditional lifestyle. But the land is then given over to Israeli forest projects or to settlement expansion. And I said, well, that's really sad, but what does that have to do with evangelical Christians? And she got out of her computer and opened it up to a YouTube video, and it was a video about Christians from America giving millions and millions of dollars to buy millions of trees to be planted on land where the Bedouins lived so that they can make the desert blossom. And these people don't realize that the land that's being planted is the land that the Bedouins have been living on. And I said, I just find this hard to believe. And she said, well, why don't you come and see for yourself? And so I did. This is what used to be the village of Al-Araqib. It's a village, a Bedouin village that's been demolished over 20 times just in the last couple of years. And every time the bulldozers come and knock down the tents, the villagers go and build them up again. And she introduced me to one of the elders of the village, this gentleman that led us around the land and picked up little pieces of garbage that had been, part of their homes, their household goods. And just kept trying to make me understand, picking up this soil and saying something and just wanting me to get what he has lost, what it means, and how tragic it is for him. And I said, well, really don't think these people who are giving money to do this know what's being done. I don't think they know the truth. And so Mikkel said, well, then why don't you tell them? And I keep hearing that over and over again, why don't you tell them? And so that's what I'm doing. I'm telling them. This is a tragedy that's going on right now. And people don't understand that. Also, that evening at my home, when I met Mikkel, I met this woman, Hanan Al-Sana. Hanan is a Bedouin woman. She grew up in one of the traditional unrecognized villages in a very traditional Bedouin home. But you can see these are her two sons. You can see the fire in her eyes too. She's a lot like Norcourt, I think. When she was a little girl, she said to her dad and to her brothers, I am going to get an education and you are not going to stop me. And she managed to get an education. Today, she is the Director of Education and Community Development at the Sidra Association. And through her projects, over 3,000 Bedouin women have been engaged in literacy, leadership, and rights education, and have become empowered individuals and agents of change in their communities. She also spearheaded the establishment of the first women's community center in an unrecognized village, and one of the, she used to take it over and answer. One of the projects in this unrecognized village is this Makaya weaving enterprise where these women do this beautiful traditional Bedouin weaving, and we visited them and tea with them and saw them at work, and very exhilarating. See the excitement in these women believing that now they can make a difference. And this is some of the weavings now hanging on my dining room at home. And I showed this picture to Hanan later, and she said, oh, I can't wait to show that to the women, to know that you have really turned their work into art, as it should be. And I just love having that there in my home to remind me, and for when people ask me, oh, where'd you get that? I get to tell them this story. Now, another woman I want to tell you about, and I know we're so late. I'll talk faster, but I can only hurry up so much because I have to show my slides. I love my slides. I've never used slides before. I'm so excited. So, okay, I have to use my slides. Where I am now, I'm really lost. Okay. This woman is named Hamadi, and I visited her yesterday in a little village not very far from here. She has 6 sons and 2 daughters and a husband, and 4 of her sons have been arrested numerous times for throwing stones or participating in nonviolent demonstrations, just kind of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the demonstrations that they have participated are demonstrating against the taking over of the village vineyards by the local settlement. And recently, the reason that we were there is a social worker took us there because recently her 15-year-old son has been arrested. And this is a pattern that has been documented so many times of young Palestinian children being arrested in the middle of the night. And this woman told me the story of her son being arrested at 2:30 a.m. They heard the soldiers outside. They came in and got her son and brought him out. This is 2 of her sons and her little daughter. And I did not show the photo of her son who was just arrested because I don't know if that's a wise thing to do for him. But she told me that as a mother in the middle of the night when her son was, the soldiers were there, they were taking her son outside, and it was a very cold night, and we met him. He's 15, but he looks about 12, a very slight boy. She said he just had his thin pajamas on, and it was so cold, and they took him outside, and I just kept saying, it's too cold, you can't do this. You have to let him put some clothes on. And she said, I know that wasn't the most important thing in the world, but just as a mother, that my little boy was cold. And so she said, I kept trying to talk to the soldiers, and they say, woman, stop, you talk too much. And finally, one of the senior, officials there said, "Look, lady, what is your problem? You're talking too much. How can we get you to be quiet?" And I just want to end tonight by mentioning a few of these women that I've got to know in the last 6 months that I respect so much, and now they have been added to my list of heroes. This is Robbie Dallin, and many of you know Robbie. She grew up in South Africa, then she moved to Israel in 1967 because she fought for justice in South Africa, and then she came to Israel and wanted to fight for justice here. She said, I thought I'd come there and solve this conflict. And she didn't, of course, but ever since then, she's had sort of a love relationship with her homeland. She said, I love having homeland for the Jewish people. I am one. I love being here, but I hate the oppression of the Palestinian people. And she said, Israel will never be free until the Palestinians are free. Well, Robbie's son, David, was called into the military, as all Israeli kids are. But David shared Robbie's perspective about the occupation and would rather have gone to jail than to serve in the military. But he knew that as soon as he was released, he'd just be posted somewhere else. And so in the end, Robbie and David agreed that it would be better for him to serve as an officer. And as she said, set an example by at least behaving like a human being. And so David fulfilled his military service, but then in 2002, he was called up again to the reserves. And so again, he and Robbie decided that he would serve as an example. But as a soldier, Robbie says, he was a symbol of the occupying army. And so on March 3rd, 2002, 28-year-old David Damlin was killed by a Palestinian sniper. Robbie said, I was beside myself with grief. I had all the good things in life, but suddenly all of it meant nothing. I had lost my son, and there was no pain that has ever been that way. She closed her business, and she began meeting with a group called the Bereaved Parent Circle, and that's 600 Israeli families and Palestinian families who have all lost their children to the violence. And she said, I realize that the pain I feel is the same as the pain this Palestinian mother feels, and that as we speak together, as we meet together and share one another's grief and work toward peace and then speak out about this, we can make a difference. And she said, yes, it's the most painful thing I've ever experienced, but what do you do with this pain? Do you seek revenge, or do you think creatively? And I'm so inspired by her. She doesn't claim to be a person of faith, and yet she has taught me so much about what it means to be a follower of Jesus and to think creatively and prophetically and try to make a difference and be a reconciler. Another woman, named Ronnie Kader, she's also an Israeli Jewish woman. She lives on the Sderot border, and I'm really going to speed up here. She lives in a situation where she is, there are rockets falling there often. That's been kind of the theme of that, where that's been the worst. And her children are very angry, and angry against the Gazans and angry against all the Palestinians. And yet Ronnie remembers back before 2000 when she and her Gazan friends, used to go back and forth across the border, and they would celebrate together, and they had relationships. And so she says, I refuse to give that up. I refuse to let that happen. And so she continues working with an organization that plans seminars with people from Gaza, and when Gazans have to come to the West Bank, to Israel for medical care, Ronnie and her friends drive them, and she said, we cannot let this dialogue die. We can't let go of the relationships. And we, the common people on the ground, have to make our leaders pursue peace. We have to model it in our relationship. Oh, yes. And her kids say that she's crazy for believing in peace. And she says her kids are crazy to think that violence will ever solve anything. And so she's another one of my heroes. Hagit Ofren works for Peace Now in their settlement watch department. She monitors the development of the settlements and the violation of Palestinian property rights. And I met with her in November, and right at that time when I was here, she had been getting death threats from extreme Israeli settlers who were so angry because she was advocating for the property rights of the Palestinians. And she said, you know, I can't worry about that. She said, we have a voice and we must raise it. Decent people shouldn't be afraid to raise their voices. And I tell myself that over and over again. That's what we all need to believe and live according to. This is Dahlia Schindlin. She's a journalist, a researcher, a professor in Israel, and she has written extensively about the plight of Palestinians. And she's directed her writing to Jews in Israel and also to American Jews. And just recently, she's been getting really criticized by American Jews, saying, how can you do this? How can you say these things? But she said, I can't stop saying these things. She said, we need to just speak and keep speaking. Ignore the bullies, let them scream. And I think that's good. We need to ignore the bullies, let them scream. We need to speak up. This is Mikhail Basser. She lives in a kibbutz near Stero. She's a high school teacher, and she teaches out of a textbook that is a joint narrative, telling the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative. And this was produced by a group of Palestinian and Israeli teachers. But from what I understand, it's been banned kind of by both Israeli and Palestinian ministries of education. So Michaela went to the parents of her students and said, can I teach this book? And they said, well, yes, you can. And so she is teaching this book. And she said, I want to teach this book. I don't care what anybody says. I want to teach this book. We must teach this book. And she said, what I've seen with my students is that it leads to a whole new kind of dialogue. And this woman is so brave, you know, being creative, finding a way to teach what she knows to be the truth. Okay, I think. Oh, no. Yeah, okay. Okay, this is Ronit Avni. She is another Israeli Jewish woman who started an organization called Just Vision to tell the stories of the Israeli and Palestinian peacemakers. Many of you have seen the movie Budras and Counterpoint and Homefront. Ronit produced these movies, and I have been with her in many different occasions, and I will follow her anywhere and listen to her anywhere because she is so inspiring. And the last time I saw her, someone said, you know, you've tried so many things, but why do you keep trying? Is it making any difference? And she said, well, I haven't tried everything. I'm not going to stop until I've tried everything. That kind of determination, perseverance, that's what we all need to bring to this. Okay, now this really is just one more. Hanan Ashrawi. I know many of you know who she is. She's a very famous political leader here, and I never dreamed that I would meet her. But I did have the opportunity in a meeting last November, and one of the women there said, what do you want to tell American women? If you could tell them anything, what would you say? She said, I would say that it's time for American women to actively partner with Israeli and Palestinian women who are working for peace. American women have to partner with Israeli and Palestinian women. And when she said this, it made me think of another woman who said something similar. She said it a little bit differently, but she said this. Teresa. She said, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. I think Hanan Ashrawi would say that we American and Israeli and Palestinian women have forgotten that we belong to one another. But we do. And what might happen if we remember that? And if we work together for the cause of peace? There's a Chinese proverb that says, when sleeping women wake, mountains move. So that when sleeping women wake, mountains move. I think it's time for us to wake up and to move the mountains.